Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging field of data science. We bring the best minds in data, software engineering, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now here are your hosts, Frank Lavinia and Andy Leonard.
Hello and welcome back to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. If data is the new oil, then you can think of us as, well, car talk, because we focus on where the data hits the virtual road. With me on this epic road trip down the information superhighway, as always, is my trusty co-host, Andy Leonard. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing well, Frank. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just got back from the beach. Was in the Outer Banks last week. Caught the eclipse.
Nice.
And on a more somber note, I dropped my iPhone in a pool.
Oh.
Yeah, that was brutal. Brutal.
No. I was going to say, is it working now, or?
I have not tried to turn it on because I'm trying to. The other thing is, I had my iPad that has a built-in 4G connection.
Okay.
So after installing some apps, I really didn't miss it that much. So the only thing I'm really concerned about is getting the pictures off of it, because I was too cheap to get more space on my iCloud. So I actually have a MyCloud in my basement, which if you install the app, it'll sync the photos. Now, for some reason, it stopped syncing photos on August 8th.
Oh.
So I have about maybe two and a half weeks of time that photos were not synchronized, including the first day or two of vacation, which is a shame because my son and I caught our first fish.
Nice.
So, fortunately, I did send that to my father-in-law, who I have that saved in iMessage, so I can get kind of some of the stuff back.
Right.
But I also looked at a lot of YouTube videos, kind of in a panic about how to repair an iPhone. And apparently, if you have the right tools, you can take it apart, order a new battery on eBay or Amazon, and a new charging port.
Okay.
And kind of put it back together yourself and get it functioning back to normal. So I'm pondering, should I do that, or should I just kind of call it quits or whatever? I don't know. Still on the fence about that. How about you? How was your week, Andy?
I had a really great week. I was on site with a client last week, and we had a really short sprint, about 3 weeks, and we had to bring in a deliverable. And, we did that. I wish I'd had a little bit more time, but we did bring in our deliverable, and I was on site with our mutual friend, Kent Bradshaw, and he's also a fellow Microsoft certified data scientist along with you. In fact, I believe you two worked together on the Capstone project.
We did, actually. We collaborated on that, and we kind of succeeded together in the final Capstone project, and kind of quickly. The Capstone project was it was hard,
yeah,
but it was built up to be kind of harder than we thought it would be.
Okay.
So when we kind of solved the problem, it was almost anticlimactic. Like, I expected to labor on this thing for like 3 weeks.
Oh wow!
But I think in about 4 days, I had it solved, and I had a pretty good score in terms of I'm not bragging or nothing, but I did get 100% on the final project.
Nice. You should brag.
Kent used a slightly different algorithm, and I think he got a 98 or something like that on it.
Okay.
So,
well, that's you know what they call the man or woman who graduates last from medical school, right?
No, what?
Doctor.
That's true. I think one of the things that made it, I won't say easy, but one of the things that made it easier was the fact that I did the classes in a compressed time frame.
Right.
Because everything was fresh,
Right.
From start to finish, I did it inside of 6 months.
Wow.
Maybe 6.5 months. So I didn't have that kind of, took the summer off and you start all over again. It was all very fresh.
Very cool. I was just going to say congratulations to you, brother.
Thank you, man. It's been an interesting ride. I also have other good news to share. As of today, we're recording this Monday, August 28th, the day before we go out. I just started a position today at Wintellect as a senior consultant, leading the data and analytics practice that I'm going to build.
Nice.
So very cool. I've already been on some interesting meetings in terms of some interesting IoT projects. Can't talk about yet, but if they pan out, it could be very interesting. Not to mention some other data science-y type stuff that we'll be working on in the near future.
Well, some more congratulations are in order.
Thank you. It was great to kind of go on vacation and before starting this, because it's going to be quite the ride coming up.
Well, that's fantastic, Frank. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for Wintellect. I'm sure it's working out well for both. And I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.
Cool, man. Cool. And congratulations for you, because this is a new client that you're on, or at least new as in a week or two.
It is. Yeah, we started that one. We're actually, Kent and I worked together on that one. We're starting a new gig. We're kind of going part-time between two, which is something we haven't done yet before. It's usually full-time. You know how these consulting gigs go, especially if they're data warehouse related, and both of these are. And usually it's just go, 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 right? 40 hours
Right.
a week is, that's almost part-time in this world. Um, usually 50 or 60. And both of these clients just want us for part-time for probably the rest of the year, which is kind of nice. It's unusual to be sitting here at the end of August and going, I need to start thinking about January.
Right.
It's a good problem to have, to be there. Of course, everyone will be showing up, knocking on the door, and I've had that happen. I've had a few people call me out of nowhere and go, "Hey, could you come, teach a class or help us with this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can probably work you in. We'll see." I'm not doing anything between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. every night. So
Yeah, if only we can offload that our consciousness to the cloud. That would be
Oh, it's interesting you say that, Frank, because you did a really good and I think a very cogent um, data point last week, maybe the week before. It was the week before because you were on vacation last
right.
week,
Hmm.
where you were talking about people that are trying to do something akin to that, where one gentleman's trying to keep, something like his father around. I don't want to say the spirit of his dad because I don't think that's what he's after, but maybe the mind of his dad around. Could you elaborate on that some?
Yeah, so this is something that you hear Ray Kurzweil talk about. It's not exactly the singularity, but that's one of the things, is the idea that at some point in the future you'll be able to upload your consciousness into some kind of computer, and you'll be able to live on beyond death.
Wow.
And now that brings up a whole number of ethical, spiritual, I mean, you name it. Like every can of worm you can think of is opened by that. And, we could comfortably kind of say, well, that's distant future, although the progress made in the last, 5 years has said, well, maybe it's not distant future, it's future, but not necessarily distant future. And then recently I came across two stories that, well, maybe it's not that distant after all.
Yeah.
And maybe even more cans of worms are opened by this. Because, so first was a story about a lady who, it's not clear if they've known each other for something like 20 years. So whether or not they were boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, it's not clear. But basically, they have chat logs going back at least 10 years.
Okay.
And he died unexpectedly. And she was I think they both were kind of data scientist types, AI researchers. And she basically took all their chat logs and turned that into a chatbot.
Hmm.
And then she shared it with some of her friends, and people said that the chatbot was very, it was uncanny how much it was like their deceased friend.
Wow.
And that was pretty interesting. And she's actually productized that to a point.
But is this the replica website?
Yeah, so she actually productized that into something called Replica, and her name is Eugenia Kuda. It's totally probably botching her name. One, we love to have her on the show because she's actually built something very unique.
Yeah.
In the sense that Replica will ask you questions, and it'll be it doesn't quite become you, but it kind of does become you. And then related to that story is it was actually, I think, the cover story in Wired magazine for the month was how James Vlahos, his father, found out he was having cancer, and basically he and his brothers had recorded kind of interviews with him. He was talking about his life and how that, how he lived his life and what it was like growing up. And they recorded those interviews. Then they had it transcribed, and then he fed it into a chatbot kind of framework. So he can kind of chat with his dad via text message anytime he likes. And, he can, he says it's kind of like having him around.
Yeah.
And that, to me, when I heard that and I heard Eugenia's story, I thought, I mean, it's a bit like a Turing test that way. I mean, if you have, the Turing test, if you're not familiar, is if you can not tell that you're talking to an AI or a person, then that AI is sufficiently intelligent enough to be conscious.
Yeah.
But this is almost like a personal Turing test in the sense that if I create an Andy bot and I talk to the Andy bot, and the Andy bot is so well programmed, at some point, when is that bot Andy and when is it not Andy?
Right.
Now, a lot of people will say, well, obviously it's not you.
Right.
But what if they get better and better at mimicking kind of a person's speech patterns? Not just speech patterns, but also their thought patterns.
Right.
At what point does a person become codified? And at what point is that person there? It just blows your mind.
It does. And I love the spin that you had on this. You talked about it in the context, since both of these examples, people have passed away. You put it in the context of mourning. And
right.
For me, that just lit up a whole slew of things about, so how does this impact the cycle of grief, the stages of grief we're so familiar with? Does it interrupt that? Or if it doesn't interrupt it, does it skew it? Or is it adding a step? I'm really curious about how that, how that impacts us as individuals when we mourn. And I think you hit it on the head. That's probably the most cogent point of all, is if someone has passed away and yet we've got a chatbot that is a replica of them or mimics them, then, for us, are they completely gone?
Right. And then you get into this is what makes me excited about AI and this types of research, is that you get into the nature of consciousness. And no one's really figured that out.
Right.
And, this is something that religions have struggled with for millennia. What is consciousness? What happens to you after you die? I mean, these are the big questions. And we're finally at a point with technology where we're going to have to be confronted with them to at least define them in some generally agreed upon manner, more or less. I mean, or maybe not. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I mean, think about the ethical implications of making a chatbot, right? Like, what if his family objected to her creating a chatbot, right? Pretend that happened. Like, what legal ramifications would family have over creating a chatbot of somebody deceased? Like, what?
That's interesting.
I mean, this is what happens when you work with lawyers for a couple of years. You think of these things, but I mean, what are the ramifications for that? And could somebody unscrupulous do something, evil with it, or could there be, like you said, I mean, how does this affect the cycle of grief? I mean, if you live far away from your family and your only means of communicating them for the most part is through text messages, could you delude yourself into thinking that they're still alive?
Wow.
And I think the answer to that is, people can delude themselves into a lot of things.
That's true.
And this could be pretty easy. And the Wired story, the video they actually show, like he basically asked Dadbot, do you love me? And then the Dadbot, I don't forget what the response was, but it was very odd. It was clearly the AI, working through an algorithm.
Right.
But I mean, at some point, what if that's perfected?
Right.
And that really, people kind of, they posit deeply about, the singularity of this, you see the TED Talks and things like that. But I mean, what's that going to look like? What's that going to look like from an ethical point of view? What's that going to look from a spiritual point of view? Where do these people kind of weigh in on this? It's just boggles the mind. And then you can also take the philosophical tack that, in terms of defining consciousness, can you really define consciousness? Because consciousness is a very subjective experience.
Right.
I am cogito ergo sum, right? I think, therefore I am. But that doesn't work for you think, therefore you are. Like, I really can't say if you experience consciousness. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And it's not just you, Andy, but I mean, but I mean, you really can't say. I mean, and you could kind of take the, the black box approach, is that you never really interact with somebody per se, their consciousness, in as much as you interact with them through communication. So it kind of becomes a black box. You don't know if that person is conscious. It's almost like every day is a Turing test, and every interaction we have with people.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because we've been raising some red flags here, and I think they need to be raised. I certainly think that these chatbots and this sort of thing that's happening now with Replica it's not going away. It's just going to grow from here. And what is it going to grow into? How's it going to impact us? And one of the thoughts I had was more positive. I read a study recently about middle-aged males, and the number one threat to middle-aged, at least Christian males, is loneliness. And so here you have a mechanism where you can solve that problem, where, they can chat with someone. And I chat with my dad. He lives a few hundred miles away. So we text, and, I am all the time. We do Facebook back and forth. Every now and then, Dad doesn't quite have the hang of Facebook. Every now and then he'll send me a very personal message in response, in a comment to a post. And, you'll see these sometimes. I know you've seen them. It'll be, call me.
Right.
It's like that's Andy's dad saying, call me. And for whatever reason, he couldn't get into Messenger that day or what have you. But, what if that the people in those situations that don't have someone to chat with, what if there's a chatbot out there that they can talk to that fills that need for, interaction, for I was going to say human interaction, but it's not human. But it's maybe it's close enough, Frank.
Well, is it human if you can't tell if it's not human?
Well, that's a great question, and I think this is the cusp, or I'll say it this way: this is a cusp that we've been heading towards for a long time, with both technology and social media and connectedness. But I got to be honest, Frank, I saw a lot of this stuff coming. I didn't see this one coming.
Yeah, you've made some predictions a few years ago that I thought, that seems kind of out there, and I was like, it turns out he was right. But but I mean, it's just, I think what's interesting about this is that people have talked philosophically about the singularity or uploading consciousness into machines for a better part of a decade or two. But no one's really talked about what that would look like.
Right.
there's always been some talk about what that means for society if, people don't die. And then there's, that opens up another can of worms. Well, if they die, but their consciousness is uploaded, didn't they really die? Or like what, like, it's all very, for a scientific field, it gets into some very, metaphysical fields, pretty quickly in this space. And it's just fascinating, and I don't know what the answer is, or maybe we won't have an answer. Maybe, who knows? This is what makes it exciting.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to evolve. And when I saw the story that you put out, I saw the video on Facebook at the Data Driven page. I was blown away. I immediately searched and dug up the information, and I subscribe to Wired. I actually get the hard copy magazine and carry it with me when I'm on the road to read it. It's one of the few magazines I actually read. And, I read the story. I watched the video you were talking about. I saw the thing about Replica, and I actually went out there, and it advertises right out there that, over time, as you communicate with Replica, it becomes more and more like you. And that just raised a red flag for me. I'm like, there's really no need for there to be another me. I'm just one is almost one too many.
I take issue with that statement, but one of the things was my first instinct when I heard about Replica is, oh, cool, I want to sign up for that. My second thought was, what are they going to do with that data?
That's a good thought.
And that was like kind of like, I was about to start typing in I think right now it's in kind of public beta and you have or semi-public data. And I was like, right. What are they going to do with that data?
That's a good thought. Yeah.
What's going to happen if they get acquired by another company? What if, Facebook decides, hey, we have a lot of chat. You look at Messenger, right?
Right.
They have access to that data. They have access to all the posts that you made, the pictures you've done, your live streams. And, they might buy her company for a token amount of money to get the patents. But what, would Facebook get into that business in some point in the future? Oh, you'll see something that won't be clippy, but you'll see one of those those things say, hey, it looks like your friend died. Would you like to talk to them anyway? Or something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I could see them monetizing that. Certainly they have the data and they probably have the mental brain power on staff to make that happen.
Sure.
They certainly have the money to purchase her company outright.
True.
And it's amazing. It's kind of like we've trudged through the snow. Actually, I'll use an example from vacation. So off the outer banks of North Carolina, a new island has formed called Shelly Island.
Huh.
And you can get to it. It's advised that you go during low tide. And so we went out there, and it was awesome. It's called Shelly Island because the island is comprised mostly of washed up seashells.
Huh.
And you walk out there, and then I remember walking as we left, as the tide started to come in, I thought, oh, did I leave something on the island or did I leave something in the car? And I was about halfway through, and I was kind of like, at that halfway point, you're kind of like, well, and I feel like if you look at, I had this thought when I was thinking about the Facebook example. We've already donated our data to Facebook.
True.
They could do this whether we want them to or not. They could make an Andy bot probably by now. They can make a Frank bot by now. They can make, if you have a Facebook account, they probably could do it. The question is, what's your recourse as a private individual to say, no, I don't want you doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And, too, Frank, if they can do that, what's to stop them from creating some sort of aggregate, right? Where it's a Frank and Andy bot.
Right.
What would that be? The accent alone would probably break most processors. I'm kidding.
No, it's true. I mean, or what if they could kind of, one of the things that you do when you give your talk, is you talk about how in 2012, the 2012 presidential election cycle, how the Obama team basically ran simulations of the election, 60,000 times a day?
Yeah, 66,000, according to a CNN story that came out right after the election. And I can't remember the guy's name. I'll have to look it up. But I was listening to his audio book. He was talking about data science a couple of years ago. It turns out one of our guests, Mark Tabadillo, heard the guy present like the week before I talked to him. And he was reporting all of this cool stuff. But yeah, they were able to run all these simulations. And, when you look at the margin of President Obama over Mitt Romney in 2012, it wasn't a huge, landslide in votes. But as we saw in 2016, right, it was the right amount in the right spot. It wasn't nearly as tight as 2016. President Obama won the popular election in 2012, but for a while there, it was touch and go. And they credit this data science with, with helping him win the election. Surely it wasn't everything, but how do we know, right? I mean, 66,000 simulations a night, Frank, that's a lot.
Right. I mean, that's crazy. Now, let me blow your mind one step further. What if Facebook says, you know what, we have chat logs on X number of citizens, and they live in swing states. They could essentially create a virtual you and ask you questions about how you feel about certain issues.
Wow.
Think about that. We wouldn't
Wow.
know. We wouldn't know they would do that. Or what they could do is they could aggregate kind of people by, instead of creating a Frank and Andy bot, they could aggregate people by someone who lives in this area, has this income. They can create an aggregate kind of average person.
Yeah.
And ask that average person questions. And they could create a chat bot, and you can kind of, they can kind of war game the election cycle. Like, instead of running kind of just simulations on the election based on kind of general trends, they could theoretically, given enough computing power, do it based on real people. They could test messaging that way. So, I mean, I think if anything we saw in the 2016 election cycle was that the notion of traditional polling being accurate is clearly, if not dead, seriously called into question.
Yeah.
And, one of my former jobs at Microsoft was, I would organize the live streams for the kind of the C-SPAN like panels they would have. And that was one of the things, how do you measure sentiment in a world where people don't have landline phones? And most of the polls that are being done are done by traditional phone calls. And, clearly this was, prior to the election. So they said, how accurate is it going to be in the future? And it's just fascinating. So, it's, you and I are both engineers, and, with an eye towards the data science thing. And, it's not unthinkable for you to build kind of chatbots or kind of, I don't want to call them entities because they're not, but I mean, whatever they are, you can simulate a person's thoughts in that way. I mean, it could be very alarming in terms of what implications that could be. So they could, query for opinions about certain political issues or social, whatever. Like they could do that, and they could test messaging on kind of a virtual test dummy.
That's a very interesting line of thought, because you brought up sentiment, and I've been playing with sentiment analysis for well over a decade. Years ago, I ran just a big grab among friends, Twitter followers, and it did some sentiment analysis on that. And I was able to make a pretty accurate, although there was a huge fudge factor, but I was able to make a pretty accurate call on McCain Obama when that happened, just based on assigning adjectives to and exclamations, -3 to +3. And it was a dumb little database called Lang for language because I didn't want to type that much.
Hmm.
And it just rolled back and forth through the adjectives and adverbs. You can pick out nouns and verbs using the term extraction from SSIS. You can do a term lookup then and that's exactly what I did. I ran a term lookup against the Lang database and brought those sentiments out, ran them on a scale. I mean, if I was doing real data science, it would have been 0 to 1 or -1 to +1, but I wasn't that creative, so I did, -3 to 3, and it was very interesting how closely that correlated. Again, with a pretty huge fudge factor because I knew my friends were biased a certain direction. But what you're talking about now is not just sentiment analysis, but you could pose questions, hypothetical questions, I'm doing air quotes, to a person, and 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 learn things that person hasn't told you yet. Does that
Right.
make sense? And
No,
not
that
only
makes perfect
that,
sense.
not just that, Frank, but people's political views evolve. They change. Everybody's views do. So, what if you're thinking maybe not so much 2020, but 2024 or 2028? You want to be president and you've got access to all of this technology. Who's to say if, I don't know, you're the owner of a company that has lots of access to chat logs and you've been making trips recently to, early primary states? I'm being hypothetical here.
Sadly, you're
But,
not that hypothetical. Um,
but,
but yeah,
what could you do with that? And I'm not accusing, and I'm certainly not saying it's all bad, but it makes me wonder, right? Is it an unfair advantage? Um, is it any kind of advantage? I think the answer is yeah, it is.
it certainly is going to pose some very interesting ethical and possibly legal concerns in regards
I
to
agree.
what does that mean, and I mean it the mind boggles at kind of what this does, and that's kind of the thing, right? We everyone, all the policy types, they for years, for a couple of years now, they've been saying, oh, we're on the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
And people forget, because it's been a while, revolutions are messy. I mean, going back to, the agricultural revolution, some 10,000 years ago, I mean, that was very disruptive.
Yeah.
And, we don't have, news reports from those times, but we have archaeological evidence that says, I heard this somewhere, and I don't know if it's true, but apparently the Indo-European language family is a family of languages that's spoken basically everywhere from India all the way through Europe and kind of everywhere in between.
Hmm.
And those languages kind of split off into what is currently spoken in those areas. But one of the root words they've kind of uncovered through linguistic analysis is that the word for war, the root word for war or conflict, it basically translates roughly to desire for more pasture land for cows or something like that.
Wow.
So I mean, it's interesting because you can easily imagine, or desire for more cropland or something like that. But the idea that agriculture requires real estate then becomes power.
Right.
And that had been the case. If you look at the medieval Europe, right? Who were the people in charge? People who owned the land.
True.
And well, who says they own the land? Well, the people that had the means to pay the soldiers to say, we own the land. Right?
Right.
And, then you kind of had that subclass of nobility that, would swear loyalty to the king in exchange for land. And then that basically let them pay for soldiers, and very Game of Thrones type stuff, I guess.
Mhm.
But, then the Industrial Revolution, the real power became money,
Right.
starting with merchants, kind of having enough, more money than the nobility did, because land wasn't as important as it used to be. Then what became power. Basically, capital became power, right? Hence capitalism.
Right.
And now we're kind of in that cusp of, what could true power be? True power could be access to information and the ability to make sense of it. And that perhaps that hypothetical CEO and founder of a social network could realize that vision because he has, theoretically, this person would have. All right, people, we're talking about Mark Zuckerberg. I'm sorry, I can't. This is all public knowledge. This is not secret stuff. I mean, he's hired long-term political operatives and strategists. He could realize that data is the new oil in that sense, or data is the new capital. I mean, maybe that should be the theme of the show. That we would move into a type of economic system not based on capital per se, but based on dataism, if you will.
Wow.
I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility.
True.
Because all that you would need to do that would be computing power and access to the data. Well, he certainly has access to the data.
That's true.
And he certainly has the money to buy the best computing power he can muster.
True.
So it's not a done deal, but it's not outside the realm of possibility either.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about that. I don't know enough about him, personally to know what kind of leader he would make. I've heard good and bad. I think everybody's that way, right? We're a mix of good and bad. Frankly, there's no way in the world. If you came to me and said, Andy, we're just going to make you president of the United States, I'd be like, no. Forget,
right.
And that takes all of the campaigning part out of it, which is just a recipe for, digging through your past and plus making up stuff, about your past. So it's like, no, there's no way. Why would anybody even want that job right now? Is kind of what I think. And it's a combination of sympathy and morbid curiosity, especially with the past couple presidents we had. It's like, I wonder what in the world motivated you to do that. You could do so much less work and make so much more money and probably enjoy, a life outside of work, which is something you just cannot do in that job. I mean, look at the pictures of those folks in 4 years. They age a dozen years.
Oh, yeah. And if they make it through 8 years, it's like they're completely different people.
Well, yeah. I mean, President Obama looks, he looks 20 years older than he did when he went into office in 2008. It's just,
yeah,
I don't get it.
I don't know. I think Frank Underwood in House of Cards said something about, power, being kind of worth more than money.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. I mean, maybe once you make so much money, you kind of get bored and, I don't know.
Maybe that's it. I can't figure it out, but I'm really excited about the some of the positive usages that I see of this tech that we've been talking about. Like I said, people who are lonely or shut in, and them being able to not atrophy socially. I mean, being able to talk to something. I'll say, it sounds like someone.
No, I remember too. Today we're talking about chatbots, but we're not that far off from making 3-dimensional real-time rendered avatars.
Right.
That could mimic face. That's just. If you've seen Rogue One, clearly you can recreate somebody's face.
Right.
And texture it onto a 3D model.
That's true.
Does it look a little weird? Yeah, it does, but give it 5-10 years. I mean, if you watch the original Toy Story, it looks a little dated.
Yeah.
Compared to, something that Pixar would produce now. You can easily imagine that at some point in the future, we won't be talking about just chat bots. We'll be talking about, you can Skype up with somebody who's deceased, theoretically.
Wow.
And you could harbor under the illusion that they're still alive. No, it would be particularly effective in people who only interact with their distant relatives through text or video calls or something like that. I mean, it's just boggles the mind in terms of what this unleashes, And, I think we said it from the early shows that, the one of the things that's really going to make this interesting is going to be the unintended consequences.
Yeah.
I'm sure the guy who brought his dad, built the dad bot, did not, think of these things. Or if Eugenia Kuda had thought, oh, I just want to talk to my friend, but this could potentially unravel all kinds of things. And it's just amazing. Like, it's kind of, we're in the middle of this revolution now, and it's happening whether you want it to or not. That's kind of when I do my talks on data science, I kind of say, this is happening whether you want it to or not.
Yeah.
And if you want to say and how things are going to unfold, then you best suit up now and learn.
That is so true, Frank.
And, and don't complain like 10 years from now when you say you don't like the way things have turned out.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something that I'm excited to be on the edge of this, and it really goes back to that, I've seen the light, that Blues Brothers moment that I had. It was like, wow, because I went from kind of being kind of a casual, not casual, but I would build data visualizations to show to members of Congress or whatever, and I'd be like, yeah, this is kind of fun, and it's kind of cool what you can figure out, to,
right,
whoa, this is going to change everything,
yeah,
moment. And some of the stuff that they were working on a year ago, I'm sure I know one of the things has been kind of deployed already, so it's kind of like, wow, that's, they really are moving ahead with this at Microsoft. This is where they're throwing their weight behind,
yeah,
and that could be very interesting.
Yeah, they're doing some really fantastic work. I got to give them credit where credit's due. They're not the only game in town, for sure, but
No.
they have really come on strong. And I'd say if you look at, if you just think about it as velocity or maybe even acceleration, I'd say they clearly won the acceleration race in the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, this reminds me of when everything at Microsoft became about the web. They turned that
Right.
company on the dime in the mid-90s. And I'm not saying that we've not seen that type of, major shift, but it's certainly shaping up to. Let's see where they are in a couple of years. But
Frank, I may take issue with that. I don't know. I think this is pretty close to that.
It's certainly the closest we've seen at Microsoft since then in terms
That's
of
true.
making a radical shift. I'll pick on the obvious one, Windows Phone. Like, if they had made that pivot
Yeah,
when the iPhone had come out or the iPad had come out, we'd be looking at a very different device market today.
that's true.
But yeah, maybe it is. Certainly it's a much bigger company now. It's got, more fingers and more pies than it did 20 years ago, or, so maybe this is what it looks like. Maybe it's been so long, even I forgot.
Well, I remember because I returned from being in China for about 80 days on December 15th, 1994. And I'm pretty sure that's the day that Bill Gates made his "We're going to take the web" speech.
Right.
That, Frank, it's 2017. That is almost 23 years ago. Do you believe it?
No, I can't believe it at all. I actually, on the way back, we stopped in Richmond and saw a couple of people, and college buddy of mine, also a comp sci major from Fordham, and his kids are now 13.
Wow.
We have a mutual friend who's also a comp sci major, same year, whose kid is like junior in high school, I think.
Wow.
It's kind of like, oh my God, like, what happened? Like, that was fast.
Time flies.
It really does. And this is an exciting time to be. And I think, 20 years from now, we'll be talking about this and the way people talk wistfully about the early days of the web.
True. I think it's been a really great show, Frank.
I think so too. We should probably share some of the successes. As of now, we're just below 18,000 downloads.
Wow.
Which is definitely something to celebrate. This will be the 81st show published. Data Science Daily took a bit of a summer hiatus. Part of that was vacation. Part of that was I'd been traveling for job interviews and whatnot. And so that's going to start up again soon, probably after the Labor Day holiday here in the States. And yeah, we definitely been lining up some interesting people to talk to, just a matter of coordinating with their schedules.
Yep.
And so I would say, I mean, the data adventure has just begun.
I agree.
That would make a cool show title, too. We might call it that.
The data adventure has just begun. I think that's a fantastic title.
Cool. So with that, thanks for joining and listening to the show. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know via the website at datadriven.tv. And any parting words of wisdom, Andy?
Gosh, Frank, I can't think of anything cool to say. This has been a great discussion. I always enjoy this when we get a chance to hang out and talk and do these shows. I want to do another one. I want to talk, I mentioned this earlier, I want to talk with you and Kent about that data science curriculum thing. But no, this has just been awesome. It's been an awesome experience. I'd say thank you to the people who have listened almost 18,000 times. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. We didn't know what to expect launching a podcast, we've had a blast. I know I have. I'm not going to speak for Andy, but I'm guessing he's had a blast.
I've had a blast.
I mean, it's just been an incredible ride. We've spoken to some amazing people, and I was thinking like, well, maybe we should pick a favorite show. It's like it's hard to pick a favorite show. It's like picking your favorite child.
I know, they're all awesome.
You know, and they sometimes they go the way you think they will, and sometimes you're just taken to magical, wonderful places, and it's like, wow, I hadn't thought of that.
That is so true. There's pieces in every show that just stand out. I mean, we could go through all of them, but yeah, just some fantastic moments in those shows where exactly that happened. We didn't see that coming. It's out there, and we were fortunate that we captured it and we're engaged in the conversation. It's just awesome.
No, absolutely. So with that, I'll let the nice British lady take us home.
Thanks for listening to Data Driven. Don't just listen. Become a data driver by going to datadriven.tv to sign up to join the community, access to special events, tips and tricks, and more. Sign up today at datadriven.tv.